presented by Prize Picks. $100 match on your first deposit. Get $50 instantly when you play. Use the promo code LIGHTYEARS. I got a special guest today, guys. Excited about this one. Got my friend Eric, Director of Learning at Luceo Sports. Eric, how would you describe yourself to a Warrior fan who's unaware of your musings over the years with the draft?
You're welcome for the championship dynasty run. Oh, that's completely egotistic.
No.
I am a East Coast transplant. Lived half my life now out since college. That's how old I am out here. I've been working in basketball for 20 years and got the privilege of working very closely with Travis Schlenk for nearly a decade through all of the build out of the core of that Warriors team through like Kevon Looney. I don't even remember who our first, maybe Epe Udo was one of the first drafts, or maybe a little bit before that. So
claim credit for Steph and you'll be adored.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. They didn't even know who Steph Curry was until I was like, hey, this guy's pretty good. That's how that went down. I swear to God.
Yeah. So for those who don't know you, you were involved in the early, was it fair to say early days of Draft Express?
Oh, the earliest. It was still Draft City when John and I first connected, which was the first year of the website. So yeah.
And that turned into Sports Aptitude and just your general consulting work. I kind of want to just ask like general questions here. I feel like the average fan, when they think about sports, they think of it in context of when they were in high school. So it's a very kind of immature opinion of what pro sports actually is these days. They think like GM goes, watches film, gut test. That's my guy. I'm drafting him. I guess they wouldn't even think that teams are using outside consultants for drafting. My question for you, I guess, is more like, just how prevalent is the use of outside resources in the drafting and scouting process these days?
It's an interesting question. I don't know necessarily how prevalent like paid outside consultants are, because a lot of stuff that's changed is there are just larger budgets. The biggest difference between when I started and where things are now is that the organizations are just growing. Front office, staff, and performance science. Like when I first started, there was probably 7 dudes that made like all the decisions. Right now, organizations have 30 plus people working, and there are more people under contract, right? Instead of just kind of these like outsourced independents. But that service like is still very much alive. I just think that the margins on what people are looking for in terms of outside contracting versus bringing things in-house may have changed a little bit in the, 3 or 4 years that I have not been doing the draft consulting thing.
Cool. No, that's interesting to know. It does feel like every team's kind of like always looking for whatever edge they can get in scouting, and as everyone gets smarter, it's harder and harder to find those edges these days. Let's start on your general opinions here. So, like, when you're looking at a player, you just like walk me through your process and how you scout a player, what you're looking at. Floor is yours, my man.
Yeah. So most of the stuff is not rocket science, right? In terms of skill sets, right? Like, I do think that you have to have some kind of intuitive sense of like what works or not. I don't necessarily believe that you have to do a ton of stuff live to watch a player. I think live events are much better for communicating with players, seeing the stuff that's happening when the game isn't going on, etc. I won't go too far in the weeds there, but I think the most important stuff is having perspective and context on like what works in the NBA. After all, this is like, it's all draft scouting is basically recruiting for job candidates. So like, first and foremost, when you hear that like boards are much different for teams, like it's a huge part of it, because you do have to know kind of what the actual job criteria are, right? This is like very obvious, I think, in retrospect to Warriors fans, when you look at players like James Wiseman or whomever, like the fit and what that means specifically matters a lot. And being able to really have a solid sense of what is necessary for that environment, I think is one of the biggest things that I did. Is really, like, you hear team context a lot now, and I don't know if everyone fully articulates that. But it's the combination of the skill sets fitting in, the direction of the organization, and what the opportunities would be for. I use Wiseman as an example because it wasn't just necessarily, just being bad talent wise, but you're also talking about a championship dynasty team trying to incorporate a guy who had missed the better part of 2 developmental years, right, coming into the league. And it's like, so I think it's a lot less about like seeing tools and seeing like a raw skill, and really like, for me at least, the process about matching the player right to the work environment, basically, right, to the team, and understanding that extends beyond the skill sets. It's very much about the person that is coming into that environment too, and how they're going to handle that holistic process, who their coworkers are going to be, what the role expectations are, what the learning curve is going to be, etc. It's just like any other job. Like, if people,
Right.
I think for fans, if you stop, romanticizing the sport and you just think about, well, how many jobs have I been in? And like, it starts to become, well, it's just that, right? Like, that's the most important stuff, is thinking about it as an actual job.
No, that's actually a really good way to distill it and essentially simplify the concept. You brought up James Wiseman, famous, miss for the Warriors here. It sounds to me like you think that was more of a mis-scouting, like it wasn't a development issue as much as like it was just never going to work in the context of what the Warriors had going on. Is that an accurate way to put it? Or do you think if they went back in time and tried to develop him in a different fashion, it might have worked? In other words, they didn't make a different pick. They just set the situation up differently.
Obviously, there's so many factors, and use the cop out, be like, it's hard to say. When I look at that situation, though, not even with hindsight, just remembering that draft, like, and I know there was all that stuff about, well, he interviewed great and they had a great dinner or whatever. That, like, I don't know how valuable like interviews are, but I do know investing in the person matters. I just said that, so I'd be disingenuous, but I did have serious reservations about, and this might be from my background as a Bostonian and New Englander, and watching Brady and Belichick just absolutely burn through a ton of like young receivers. I'm like, the nature of the Warriors system always seemed like a real tough lift in terms of the amount of like basketball IQ or whatever you want to say. And to couple that with somebody who was very skilled, I get the vision of it, but like had been lacking a significant degree of polish. I just did not know how the delta was going to be made up. Right. And I didn't see the team being like some kind of brute force, just throw them in thing. It seemed like, okay, well, where they're at, they're not going to just let a guy completely max out on mistakes, right? Like, it's going to be really hard to get on the court. And that's kind of what played out. So I don't know in hindsight if there's something that could be done differently, as much as I think it was a gamble on the upside and the kid, but the differential in experience, I think, was just insurmountable.
In other words, if he went to a situation where, like, let's say the Houston Rockets, who were kind of just full rebuild for a few years there, 20, and he just got to, hey, you're getting 30 minutes to figure it out every night, we might be talking about a different player in year 4 than what ended up happening with the Warriors.
Yeah, I think that's one of the common misnomers. I don't want to speak for everybody and go everybody, but like, I think also there tends to be this notion with fans that like the cream always rises to the top, and like somehow like, merit will like what, like it just works itself out. Like, there are so many players that don't succeed or even reach their like peak potential, specifically because of their early phase career development just isn't conducive to creating, kind of that work environment. Another guy that obviously is familiar to Warriors fans is like the Moses Moody like scenario, who,
right,
who has done a ton of positive things. And I think I said it, like, he hasn't been given an opportunity to exceed like the competent, like he's already hit basically every benchmark you could ask for in the opportunity that he's given. and he just hasn't been afforded the opportunity to do more. And there's a million reasons for that. It's not just, Steve Kerr doesn't like him or whatever. It's the composition of the roster. There's a lot of things, but I think that happens a ton where guys get blocked because like their individual objectives don't align with the organizational I call it organizational direction, where the franchise is, what their expectations are, what the pressures are on the people making those decisions, like, etc. That's also a common business thing, which is why normal people change jobs so frequently, right? We don't live in this like kind of 50 years in the gold watch era anymore. So it's very understandable when you translate it back to your own kind of career, progressions. But for players, it's really frustrating. And I think Wiseman was, substantially impacted because he hasn't really gotten a chance to just straight up play 30 minutes a game like your average number 2 guy would get for at least a season or two.
No, definitely. You mentioned Moses Moody. I'm going to go out of order because I was going to ask you about all the Warriors young players, but we'll just dovetail that one. This is the Warriors roster for next year. The money doesn't matter. And I'm looking at this and like, I agree with you. He's displayed more than enough that he should be getting, 20 minutes per game on a normal team. And maybe it gets even more if he continues playing. He's shown enough stuff that he can be kind of a 3-and-D wing in the league. And I'm looking at this and I just don't know where his minutes are going to come from. And it's just kind of like, okay, so Steph. Podz is going to most likely start at the 2 guard. If not start, he'll play a certain amount of minutes at the 2. You bring in D'Anthony Melton. That's your best point of attack defender unless GP2 randomly gets healthy again. I think he's kind of on the way out. So those are more minutes that are going to be in the backcourt. All of a sudden, there's not much for Moses Moody there. Buddy Hield's the second best shooter on the roster. He's going to get minutes just by virtue of sometimes you just want a shooter out there running off of screens and doing, catching fire that way. Then you get to small forward. Andrew Wiggins is the presumptive starter there and clearly their best wing defender when he's locked in. And Kuminga, I don't know if he can play the 3 on this roster, but like you start doing the math on this and we're back to kind of the same situation we've seen the last few years with him, right?
Yeah, for sure. And this is good that you have this roster up too. It's like, I don't remember who I was talking about this with a couple days ago, but like, this also impacts the other players, right? We talk about Moses Moody, but like the decisions made are also going to influence like the behaviors of the other players, right? So when you have a logjam, like just bring up Buddy Hield, for instance. Like Buddy Hield took this deal, I'm sure, with the expectation of like playing a decent amount based on his age and his experience to get a better contract. Like he took a deal and went to the situation basically to capitalize on I could be like Klay Thompson, whatever, like a career builder for future stuff. So like you could decide that that's not what's going to happen, but then you're going to have a disgruntled, player on that side too. Gary Payton might be on the way out, but does Gary Payton understand? Like, right. Like they're like having a bunch of people that are in these kind of like mid-career, crossroads things can be extremely tenuous because if you can't make everyone happy, which seems rather difficult to do in this situation, you have to start making choices to pare down things or you risk the locker room stuff, which is like, it's a big thing. It doesn't mean that people necessarily be overtly aggressive or whatever, but when you have people that are frustrated and dissatisfied, that's not great for your overall, kind of organizational goals. So yeah, that's the biggest thing is I don't look at this roster and have a clear sense of what's the 9-man rotation.
You didn't even mention him, but D'Anthony Melton took a 1-year deal. I mean, he's a very good player. He's 26 years old. I have a very hard time imagining he took that without a promise of a very consistent rotation spot because he's playing for a long-term contract as well. And honestly, like just when you look at the players, I don't think he needed the promise. He's going to get it just because he's one of the better players on the roster and fits the way they like to play. But yeah, I mean, it's very guard heavy. I was kind of, when they signed D'Anthony Melton and Buddy Hield, I'm like, I like those moves. Those are players who make sense in the system that they like to run. But I always in the back of my head thought like, okay, well, clearly another move is going to have to be coming to go address the fact that Draymond's going to be playing full-time center And as of right now, it seems like we're rolling with 8 guards and Draymond rotation again. So
yeah,
don't look so great.
It will be interesting to see what they do with Looney and where Trace Jackson Davis fits into this. This roster screams going small, which is like fine, but like in order to play all these guards, forget about the fact that you just don't have that many like centers, if any. I mean, I guess we'll call Looney the only classic center, and that's stretching the definition of like a classic center. But like in order to even remotely play all these, and then don't throw Kyle Anderson in here too. Like, there's just a lot of mouths to feed, and I just don't see, like, it's one thing if everyone's signing up for a title run. It's another thing when you look at this roster and you're like, okay, well, what is also the upside of this? So I got excited when I look at like a Jimmy Butler trade or whatever. I'm like, I need a consolidating move that at least has some kind of like, okay, I don't know if you can win it, but like, I know that this roster isn't going to win a title. And if you're just pissing a lot of players off that are looking to like capitalize off of this situation in order to better their own, second side of their careers, I'm like, I don't love that either, because it's not going to be a feel good or a vibes deal either if a bunch of people are whining about their playing time.
Right. I mean, and that's kind of where they're at. Like, it's just a very guard heavy roster. You mentioned Jimmy Butler. I don't know if he's going to get moved. Seems like contract leverage stuff that Miami hasn't offered him the contract he wants. He obviously can opt out next offseason. I expect it to play out loudly in the media over the next few months. He is, on the one hand, like everything that the best version of the Warriors are about in terms of just a winning player, kind of great defensive player, can play in big games, that sort of stuff. On the other hand, a very clunky fit with Draymond Green. So let's say the mythical trade happens, which in the context of the Warriors would assuredly involve Andrew Wiggins, probably some version of GP2 Looney's expiring contracts. I'm sure Miami's thrilled about that. And then some of your youth and some picks in that context. But, you clear up a big part of the logjam. How does a Jimmy Butler Draymond combination even work? Because you're talking about two guys who are best with the ball in their hands, who don't like to shoot it from the outside.
Yeah, it's definitely a fit thing on paper. You're like, how does this work? I've just watched those guys enough to feel like they'll figure it out. I don't think it's going to be perfect. I've watched Jimmy Butler just morph into whatever he needs to be, like just through sheer force of will when it comes to go time. And there's no perfect solutions either at this. Like, I think what's interesting to me about it the most is that Miami and Golden State are in similar situations where it's like, okay, you have some stuff, but you're kind of in between phases of your team build. And I'm like, can we just make it like one of you hit the reset button and one of you go all in on whatever's the last 1 or 2 years of like, your best guys being, at that level. And I'm just like, that's the most frustrating thing about the Warriors, as we've talked before, is that like, I get it. I understand, like Steph Curry's don't come around all the time, but like I've been through enough team build metamorphoses that I'm like, there is light again if you have a solid, intelligent organization that's about the right things and all this. It's like, okay, so make a choice, right? Like at some point, the worst thing you can do is not, they always talk about mediocrity. And so that's my bigger thing. It's like, okay, does Jimmy fit perfectly? No, but he does a lot of things. And I trust his playoff Jimmy thing and whatever. I would at least like to see, if we're going to stick with the Steph Dre and go down with that ship, then like, go with it, right? Like build out a roster and just let's see, like, and he's a guy that he's a gamer. He's a more interesting acquisition to me than, let's say, Lauri Markkanen, who's younger and you'd have longer time. And I'm like, oh, he shoots and that's nice. But I'm like, I'll take the grit and balls guy and magnify that element on this team and then fill in with like the other pieces. And I'm like, cool, that I can at least get behind. I'm like, that makes sense to me.
No, it's true. Like Lowry, on the basketball fit's obvious to anyone who's ever watched him play, but it's like, you don't know what he looks like in a conference finals or even a conference semifinals. Never been there. I know what Jimmy looks like in those moments, and it's exactly the type of player you want on your roster. I want to ask you about a couple of the Warriors' young players, but before we do that, here, I want to tell you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You could turn $10 into $1,000. Get in on the excitement and win 100 extra cash this summer's games on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LIGHTYEARS on your first deposit match up to $100. That's code LIGHTYEARS on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now that the bills have been paid. Okay, let's get back to it. We've got a few more minutes here. So, Jonathan Kuminga, what do you see when you look at him, and what is kind of your best case scenario for the Warriors with him this season? Not 5 years from now, but based off of what we've seen these 3 years, what would you consider best case scenario? Doesn't seem like they're going to give him the early extension. Looks like they're going to make him prove it. That could obviously change, but also I think they just want to keep trade flexibility. If they extend him, they have none.
Yeah, with that level of financial investiture, like I think that, and the way that the thing is set up, I saw there was a lot of people worrying about like what it means, and because he was frustrated last year or whatever. But like, I'm less concerned about that. I think it's the smarter way to go, because you also do need to see some growth there. I think, to your point, I don't see him being an effective 3 right now. He's a 5'4" to me, or a 4'5". Like he's kind of, and that stuff has worked. Like the good news is that like there's some Draymond at the 5, Kuminga at the 4, lineup stuff that has looked interesting. I think that it makes sense. It's not just the shooting, in general, because obviously based on team composition, you can have 32% is enough if you're a slasher and you have shooting around. Like you can make things work. It's more about don't overcommit when you don't really know what your team identity is like overall. Right. Like why would you go all in on a guy that still has some stuff, like, and they reserve the right to be able to do whatever they need to next summer. So like, okay, maybe the entire composition of this team is different, and Kuminga makes perfect sense the way that they like strip this thing down. I could see a world where Trayce Jackson-Davis, this is the one I've wanted a Podz, Moody, Kuminga, like Trayce Jackson-Davis, like future thing. And I'm like, oh, none of those guys are a star. But I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But like they're good players, and that's like better than nothing. And you can manage cap with a lot of those guys pretty easily, even with Kuminga on a $150 million deal. So like it's the wait and see. Like he made progress last year. He's got upside. There's still people that like him. He's not a slam dunk whatever, but he's definitely a good player and a guy that's going to play 12 plus years in the league. So it's like, let's get another development season in as a main rotation guy and see what the progress is.
What would you like to see from him most? Like which aspect of his game would you like to see the most progress? With the cop out being everything.
I mean, the easy one for me would be like more playmaking for others. Yeah. I got to be careful with my terminology, because like playmaking can also mean playmaking for yourself, and he's pretty good at that. I would just like to see him have a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily have to be flashy and like off the bounce or whatever, but I would like to see him used. This is kind of common, but a friend of mine who is an assistant general manager, who will not be named, had long made a comparison to Jaylen Brown. And I'm like, okay, can you give me some mid-post stuff? If you're not a great 3-point shooter, he is physically arrived now at the can beast matchup guys. And I would like to see a little bit more baseline mid-post, like reading things when the game is stationary and getting some mismatches and being able to just elevate over people, because he has some touch, right? So I don't think everything is about attacking from the perimeter. I would love to see a little bit more of that and using, I think the post is subtly coming back into fashion now that people realize it doesn't just need to be your least athletic five, like center being the post ups. Like, hey, actually post ups can be efficient if you have guys that are really skilled at, doing things off elevation. And he seems like a guy that would be interesting to play kind of inside out. That would be what I'd like to see, is if they're going to go with it, like, don't make him attack everything in transition or from like the elbows, right? Or the corner. I'm like, get him closer.
No, I agree with you there. And that's kind of always been the, like, does he need to kind of slow down as kind of a playmaker, or does he need to become a better shooter? And like, just being realistic, like he's not going to turn into Kevin Durant level, like 3-point shooter or something like that. I think you, whereas it is reasonable to expect him to take a step and be a guy who can at least make a basic read if help comes to him in a post and find it, a guy in the corner type of thing.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, is like, you don't always, it's like an old adage with bigs, right? Where it's like, you don't like when to use power and when to use speed. And I think that would be the most simplistic thing I'd say. And that comes from the coaching staff too. It's like, yes, part of it is him slowing down and getting rhythm and doing all those things. But part of it is also the staff knowing where a player's at and being like, look, man, this guy is a physical specimen. He has massive like he can punish some people if he uses his power game more. And I would like to see that, right? You don't need to be as good of a ball handler when you start quicker. It's like, let's put him in some power situations, slow the game down, make it a little easier to have some basic cross-court reads, like take advantage of the thing that he's best at, which is, we have a lot. This is a league heavy, and as my wife says, there's no there's no men anymore. She's like, we're all the big guys. And I'm like, right. And I'm like, like there's plenty of size mismatch opportunities in the league now. And it's like, you work those things. That's something I think that he could be very comfortable with, because there wouldn't really be any significant, defensive pressure when he has the advantage like that and can see everything coming at him.
Yeah. And you mentioning Jaylen Brown just brings me back to my point. I really wish they got a stretch big to open up the court more than Draymond, but alas, we'll end it. Actually, if I got 10 seconds of your time here.
I just got another 10 minutes.
Cool. Let's talk Podz real quick.
Yeah.
Probably their best draft pick in about a decade, just in terms of rookie production. Actually, not probably, definitely their best draft pick in terms of rookie production. What do you see when you watch him? What are you looking for?
So this is something that I've always looked at, but over the years, as more and more, kind of attention's been on it, like feel over like everything else. Like I just like tools are great. And even going back to the Jaylen thing, right? Not a high feel guy, but like when you are extremely talented, like great. But on the whole, I want to baseline off of feel guys, and Podz just has a feel for the game, right? Like it's just obvious when you watch him. He can play at a speed where you can see that he's comfortable reading the court while moving fast. And that negates so many like athletic limitations overall, because it's the whole, like, if your mind will always move faster than anybody's feet can, the whole thinking a play ahead, whatever you want to say. But if you know what you want to do and you're setting up people all the time, it just makes you look so much more explosive. And he's not a schlub, athletically, but let's say like middle, whatever. Now he's not an outlier freak, right? It's not He's not
Jonathan Kuminga.
Yeah, he's not Jonathan Kuminga. But like the ability to read the game and then have that ability to shoot off the dribble, to be able to attack off, and then you also have the foundation, right? You'd be able to shoot, opens up stuff. And when you can read the court on top of that, and it's not just kind of rote, like, oh, like the closeout, and that, like, he can just play so intelligently off of that. And then you add in the system. He is built for movement and off ball screens and like all of this stuff that like is my favorite stuff. So I think he is, I don't know how much of the not trading him was gamesmanship on, leverage or whatever, but like, I do believe that he has the chance to be a very good player. Just when I watch him, I'm like, it's hard for me to put a cap on, I don't know if he's going to be a 25 point per game, like super guy, but like I can see all-star level guard stuff because he moves so well and so intelligently with very little experience.
The little experience thing is always the part that jars me. He's late to the game as well, which is kind of like, so he thinks the game faster than a lot of veterans, and he's barely played basketball. Why do you think he's not going to continue improving? Like that's kind of my logic on that sort of stuff too. Eric, I really appreciate you hopping on.
That was fun.
Have a great day. Yeah. Have a great day, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Let's get together soon.